Another problem that you point to that I think is a newer development, correct me if I'm wrong, is the increasing privatization of intelligence. Actually, 70% of the CIA budget goes to private contractors, and they fill a lot of the seats that used to be filled by government agents.
This is a national security problem. It's the CIA, it's the military, it's Homeland Security, it's the Director of National Intelligence, the so-called intelligence czar. A lot of that money is going to contractors. So there's no real accountability, there's no real responsibility. I think there's been a breakdown in responsibility in terms of what organizations have done, such as Blackwater overseas, and some of the horrors that they've committed that are still gradually working their way through the courts. But the contractors have allowed the CIA to get beyond oversight, their internal oversight, the Office of Inspector General, which Leon Panetta has really compromised, and then the external oversight, the role that the Senate Intelligence Committee should play. They don't have enough oversight over these contractors, and a lot of harm has taken place there.
And speaking of congressional oversight, how would you rate their performance over the last 15 years?
Over the last 15 years, it's been abysmal, and I can say that in a bipartisan way. So whether you're talking about Republicans such as Pat Roberts or Dianne Feinstein, until this recent episode with John Brennan over the torture memo, what the Senate Intelligence Committee has done is to make itself an advocate for the intelligence community. And John Brennan, when he was being confirmed as CIA director, he even referred to the committee as an advocate for us. And Dianne Feinstein thought this was a compliment. This is not what Frank Church had in mind when he created the Senate and House Intelligence Committees in the mid-1970s. And I think for the first 15 years, up through, I would say when David Boren was the chairman in the late 1980s and early 1990s, but when he committed himself to the confirmation of Robert Gates, even though Gates couldn't be confirmed in 1987 because they assumed he was lying about Iran-Contra, which he was, that was the real turning point. So I would argue since 1991, we haven't had that junkyard dog. And in a democracy, to have a secret society without oversight, which we didn't have for the first 30 years, and now we have very weak oversight, this is a very dangerous development.
And what we've also discovered, both through leaks from Edward Snowden and also just obviously false comments, that intelligence officials will routinely make comments that turn out to be false. How does that impair the public's ability to get true information about both the threats that face us and whether the actions that the government's taking are appropriate?
Well, you've had two examples in just the last couple of years. You've had the so-called intelligence czar, General Clapper, lie to the Senate about massive surveillance. And then you've had the CIA Director John Brennan lie to the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee about whether or not the CIA was spying on the very agency that's supposed to be conducting oversight. You know, who's watching the Guardians? It turns out the CIA thinks they should be guarding the Guardians of this whole process. Those two individuals should have been fired immediately. I don't think Obama can risk challenges basically to the separation of powers, which is what John Brennan has done. So if you don't have the credibility as a secret agency in a democratic society, you're going to weaken your overall mission over a period of time, and I think that's what's happened.
And for the public to try to understand this enterprise, is there any avenue that they have? Yeah, I mean, you know, obviously in a democracy we expect our elected leaders to be the eyes and ears on what the government's doing, but are they just completely shut out of the process now?
Well, they don't have to be. I do a lot of teaching and lecturing, and my point has always been there's tremendous amounts of information out there. There are congressional hearings. There are people such as James Banford, who's written so well in the National Security Agency. Thomas Powers wrote a wonderful biography of Richard Helms that gives you an idea of the political role of a CIA director. Mark Danner at the New York Review of Books has written some interesting pieces. And I think the country, when they get to intelligence matters and the way intelligence is discussed by professionals, it's like inside baseball. There's a terminology and a language they don't completely understand They're not familiar with it, so they tend to hold it at arm's length. And I think that is dangerous. And Eisenhower warned about that too, because he said when you get into an era of permanent war, which we've been in since 9/11, you're going to see compromises of civil liberties and civil rights. And that's exactly what we've seen in this country.